Attention passengers, if you're booking Royal Caribbean cruises from Singapore, you must be fully vaccinated. Reopening today, PASIR PANJANG Wholesale Centre puts in place enhanced safe management measures. And we get a glimpse into Singapore's first community treatment facility, which has admitted over 70 seniors so far. You're watching The Big Story. I'm Olivia Quay. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. All Singapore Royal Caribbean cruise passengers 12 and older must be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 in order to make bookings from next month. According to Royal Caribbean, this is on top of safeguards already in place, like its crew needing to be vaccinated. Its Quantum of the Seas and Dream Cruises World Dream are the only two cruises here given the green light to offer cruises to nowhere. It's not mandatory, though, for Dream Cruises guests to be vaccinated, but only those vaccinated can dine in at the restaurants on board. PASIR PANJANG Wholesale Centre is back in business and it's reopened with enhanced COVID-19 measures in place. The facility was closed for 3 days of deep cleaning after the virus was detected among workers and trade visitors, with the cluster growing to 127 cases. Well, from today, all tenants and workers entering the premises must wear coloured wristbands according to whether they work in the fruits, vegetables, dried goods or cold room sections. The frequency of rostered routine testing for everyone working at the centre will also be increased from every 14 days to every 7 days. Well, Singapore reporting another daily high in new cases last night with 2,268. They comprise 1,810 in the community, 448 dorm residents and 10 imported. 8 more fatalities also announced yesterday, bringing the death toll to 93. As of yesterday as well, 1,335 cases were warded in hospital. Among them, 197 patients needed oxygen supplementation and another 34 were in critical condition in ICU. Of the patients who have fallen very ill, 192 are older than 60. Record high new cases the past 2 days, hospital cases on the up as well, 38 deaths so far this month. Well, joining me on the show is Professor Ooi Eng Eong from the Emerging Infectious Diseases Program at Duke-NUS Medical School. Welcome back to the show, Prof. So whether it's the numbers or how we've been managing this COVID-19 wave, what concerns you the most right now?
Well, I think the numbers don't tell the same story as it did last year. Obviously, vaccination has changed a lot of things. COVID-19 was a fearsome disease last year because many people who get it will go on to get severe COVID and then end up requiring oxygen and ICU care. But with vaccination, that has mostly been changed to mild flu-like illness, right? So the outcome of getting infection with SARS coronavirus 2 is very different this year compared to last year.
One of the big stories out today is that PASIR PANJANG Wholesale Centre has reopened, but not before it went through the usual cycle of measures, shutting down and stepped up testing upon opening again. Prof, it's only a matter of time before a cluster pops up somewhere else, and that will trigger the whole closing, testing, opening process once more. What's your view on this particular measure?
A lot of the measures that we did last year, such as closing and then cleaning, deep cleaning and all that, and then restarting, isolating people who have had contact with cases, isolating people who are PCR positive but asymptomatic and all that, were really the reason why we did all that last year was because there was no other solution, right? So we had to prevent the virus from transmitting as much as we could. This year is very different because of two things. One is vaccination. That has changed the outcome, as I explained earlier, that majority of the cases now are very mild and no different from a common cold and other flu-like illnesses, right? So in terms of the impact of the disease is much lower. The second one, which also makes a big difference, is Delta, the Delta variant. The Delta variant is a lot more infectious, a lot more transmissible, but it doesn't seem to cause more severe disease. And because it is more transmissible, a lot of what worked last year, such as this closing down premises, deep clean, and all that, do not work as well this year. And I think, from my perspective, I don't think it's necessary because now majority of the people in Singapore are also vaccinated. And so, the vaccination will protect us from getting the severe COVID, which is how we're going to have to live with this disease. I think the question that's facing Singapore is, can we continue on this path of, virus elimination? The answer is yes, we can. But it's going to come at a price, right? A big price, because Singapore's well-being, or the future, thrives on a vibrant economy. In other words, people need to be able to move in and out of Singapore, because that's how our economy is going to grow. So the question for Singapore really is, when do we open up? Right? It's not whether we should open up, but it's rather when we can open up. And sooner or later, we have to. And when we open up, more and more Delta virus is going to come into Singapore. So either we accept it now, or we're going to say we're going to delay this and let it come later. But either way, it's going to come. From my perspective, actually, it is not a bad thing to let it happen sooner rather than later. The reason is we know Delta. We don't know all of it, but we know enough of Delta. It may change. By next year, it could be another virus that perhaps is even more transmissible than Delta. And then we will be opening up at a point where we have a lot of unknown to deal with.
Building on that, Prof, are you surprised by how long it's taking Singapore to learn to live with COVID-19? And are there any countries with a different approach to endemicity that we should be learning from?
I think, to me, it is not terribly surprising, in the sense that it is hard. It is hard to let go when you were so successful last year, right? The success, of course, came at a big cost to Singapore. I mean, we had to mobilize our reserves. A lot of people's businesses were suffered. In terms of the success that we had last year, at some point we have to let it go if we're going to move on. And that's the hard part, to let go of a success, to go back and say, okay, now I'm going to start all over again. And I think that is not just for COVID, it applies for a lot of things. Whatever that we've been successful, we tend to hold on to it. And unfortunately, it is such a time where we have to let it go, and hopefully we'll get there.
Right. Well, Prof, on another subject, or a related subject, so to speak, many of us thought, or to be more precise, hoped that vaccines were our ticket out of the pandemic. Do you think COVID-19 vaccines will get better, not just at preventing serious illness, but actual infection?
I don't think there is no vaccine that will prevent infection. I think that we should just set that aside. We're asking too much of both the vaccine and our immune system. Our immune system is not designed to prevent infection. It's designed to keep us well, to prevent against disease, right? So now the question is, are the mRNA vaccines, or the vaccines that are currently used in Singapore, are they good enough to prevent disease? The answer is yes, right? Because really the crux of the problem is when you have a lot of severe cases, then it occupies the healthcare infrastructure, it uses up beds and all that. And so patients with other conditions now do not have access to these beds and to the services. If we can keep that number within a manageable range, then there's no problem. So therefore, what we want to be able to move forward with is that, okay, we will be able to live with this virus, provided it doesn't make us so sick that we need to be in the hospital. Because we've lived with influenza, we've lived with dengue, we've lived with many other viruses that, such as hand, foot, and mouth disease and all that are potentially dangerous, but we don't go around shutting down societies just because there's a case of, dengue, or a case of influenza, or a case of hand, foot, and mouth, all the time. I think one of the hard things that conceptually difficult for people to accept is this idea that this is COVID-19, right? That there are 2,000 cases of COVID-19 in Singapore. I think that doesn't give the same, that doesn't convey the right message, because COVID-19 over the past 1.5 years have always struck fear in people. And so if you say there are 2,000 cases of COVID-19, naturally that will be fearsome, right? Whereas I think as I said earlier, the COVID-19 of last year isn't the COVID-19 of this year, especially amongst the vaccinated. Maybe it's time for us to differentiate and call it slightly, give it a different name. So for instance, I work on dengue, and in dengue, we split dengue into dengue with warning signs, and severe dengue. So it's not all dengue cases are the same, right? So you have the different categories so that in each category, you manage them differently, right? So maybe it's time to have COVID-19 split into flu-like COVID-19, COVID-19 with warning signs, and severe COVID-19, so that the majority, the flu-like COVID-19, do not need to be hospitalized, do not need to be managed, and the patient may choose to self-medicate rather than even see a doctor. Whereas those with warning signs, then perhaps they ought to be admitted for observation, and certainly the severe COVID ought to be in the hospital because they will require oxygen. They may require intensive care. So if we split this, then it's not so alarming on both the patient as well as the public. When they see the numbers, they don't get shocked by the fact that there's 2,000 potentially lethal cases every day in Singapore. That's not the situation.
Right. Well, you have given us plenty to think about, Professor Ooi. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I've been speaking with Professor Ooi Eng Eong from the Emerging Infectious Diseases Program at Duke-NUS. Moving on, there are currently 4 drugs in use to treat COVID-19 here, and from next month, there'll be a 5th. The latest addition is a COVID-19 antibody cocktail developed by Regeneron and Roche. It can be used to treat patients who are mildly sick but at risk of severe illness. An ongoing study by the Health Sciences Authority found that symptoms cleared up an average of 4 days earlier compared with the placebo group. Well, it's been a week since Singapore's first community treatment facility started receiving COVID-19 patients, and about 75 seniors have been admitted. According to the COO of Woodlands Health, which runs the facility, so far 3 of its 5 floors have been opened for patients who are generally expected to stay for about 10 to 21 days, depending on their conditions. One key aspect of looking after seniors with COVID-19 is ensuring their physical fitness doesn't decline. So, physiotherapists and occupational therapists have been brought in to conduct daily exercises and activities. Taking a quick look at non-coronavirus headlines, Singapore Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan says the issue of Myanmar came up during his meeting with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington, D.C. While there's no quick and easy fix to the crisis, both diplomats believe that the solution ultimately lies within Myanmar itself.
Well, both Secretary Blinken and I are deeply concerned and anxious. The plight of the people of Myanmar. I mean, they were already challenged economically. The pandemic pushed the economy down even further. The levels of poverty have risen. And then the political instability that came about because of the coup and the violence that has generated. So we are all deeply concerned for the plight of our brothers and sisters in Myanmar.
Well, fans of Britney Spears jumping for joy outside a courthouse in Los Angeles after a judge removed her father, Jamie Spears, as conservator of her estate. The next step will be a termination hearing set for November. It's a pivotal moment in a long legal battle that has sparked the Free Britney movement, led by fans who believe the pop star is being controlled against her will. At home from today, the public can view 2 new additions to the giraffe enclosure at the Singapore Zoo. The male giraffes named Adil and Balaji arrived from India in May and have since settled in very nicely, enjoying a daily diet of hay and lots of leaves from the starfruit, jackfruit and acacia trees. They'll share the exhibit with father and son duo Marco and Jubilee. Well, a very poor impression of 007. I'm just very excited for the latest James Bond film, No Time to Die, out in Singapore cinemas today. Journalist Jan Lee here with her review. So hi Jan, it's Daniel Craig's fifth and final time as 007. Is the movie a fitting finale for the Craig era?
Yes, I definitely think so. It is a very worthy send-off for Daniel Craig, who has been in this role for about 15 years since Casino Royale in 2006. So I think what's special about the Craig era is that, his stories are very linked. So over the 5 films, there really is an emotional journey for him. And the events of the 5 films really tie together quite well in this final movie. And I think he gets a lot to do. He's sexy, he's funny, he's also like angry and grieving. And there's a lot of emotional depth for him to mine in this movie. And he gets, all the chance to be the James Bond that people know and love, ordering a vodka martini, doing all these impressive action sequences. But also it focuses a lot on his personal growth and his own journey and his own feelings and thoughts. Yeah, I think that's what makes it such a great send-off for him.
Well, it sounds like, this is definitely a more in-depth James Bond, but, the character is one of the most sexist and misogynistic ones in literature and in film, I suppose. But with writer Phoebe Waller-Bridge, best known for her work in Fleabag, attached to this project, is her influence felt in No Time to Die, Jen?
Yes, definitely. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is one of my favorite TV writers ever, and she created Fleabag, which is one of my favorite shows ever. And I definitely feel like there's a lot more levity in the script. She was brought in, if I'm not wrong, by Craig to polish the script, add, bits of humor in it and make the women a bit more compelling. And I think it's definitely still James Bond's film. It's so focused on Craig's character, but I feel like the women do have a little bit more agency in them, and there's very British, very dry humor in it that I think earned some laughs when I was in the theater, and I was in a critics viewing, which is usually very, very quiet because critics are jaded people. But anyway, I thought it was quite good, and I particularly liked Ana de Armas's arc in it. She has a brief appearance. She doesn't have a very long she doesn't have a lot of time in the movie, but in the time that she appears, she's so charming, she's funny, and she's very capable. And she also wears I think the kind of dress that will go down in movie history, because it's quintessentially Bond girl dress, and she just looks really, really great and so confident and comfortable in the role. And of course, there's Lashana Lynch, who plays the very first female 007, because in this movie, James Bond has retired. So he's retired his codename, and then somebody else takes over his codename, and that's Lashana Lynch. And she's going head to head with him. She's always making jokes about him, making digs at him, and she's very funny and very capable. And I enjoyed the touches of this humor in the movie.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. Spectre left me rather disappointed, but I can't wait to see this one. I've been speaking with journalist Jan Lee, and you can check out her review at straitstimes.com. So, from James Bond to our Women of Action travel correspondent, Clara Locke, who recently went through a grueling survival camp. Hello, Clara. So, you and me, we are city girls, right? Give us our 4 walls, please. Well, I'm afraid to ask then, any highlights from this camp, and actually, who is it catered for?
So it's precisely because we are city people, right? That's why I think it'll be really interesting to learn about the different kinds of tools that you can use in the outdoors, as well as the kind of situations that you can use these tools if you need them for survival. So for example, if we want to start a fire, we'll just use matches, right? Or we'll use a lighter. But out there on this camp, we learn how to gather different kinds of tinder and kindling, like dried leaves, dried grass from the natural environment, as well as small, larger pieces of wood that you feed to the fire to make it burn. So then we also learn to use fire steel to create sparks, and then how to keep the fire going and how to sustain it for as long as possible. And if you're in the wild, this is going to keep you warm if it's in a cold environment, or it's also going to keep wild animals at bay. We also learn how to use a saw to cut down different lengths of wood into logs that can be lashed together to form a very simple A-frame shelter. So again, if you're in the wild and you have something waterproof like a canvas or a tarp that you can secure to it, that's going to keep you dry overnight, or maybe it's going to keep out a bit of snow. And at camp, you have the option of sleeping in the shelter that you made yourself. So because we are city folk, hopefully we'll never be in a life and death situation where we will actually have to use these skills. But it's quite empowering to know that if push comes to shove, we would know what to do in that situation. We wouldn't be completely lost in nature. And so I think this camp would be great for anyone who wants to learn these sort of skills. Try out something new. And let's be real, this camp isn't always comfortable. It's dirty, they're gonna touch some soil, there are bugs, it's hot, there are mosquitoes. But travel isn't always comfortable, and you usually always come away with it with like a great story to tell and great experiences. So I think that's what people will get from this camp as well.
For sure. So for those of us who are interested in being Bear Grylls, where can they source for these survival camps, Clara?
So this camp is run by Beyond Expeditions. They're a company that used to run tours to Mongolia before the pandemic. And now that people can't travel, they've branched into these sort of bushcraft experiences. So the founder, Scott, used to teach like fire making and how to saw wood and some of these skills in day courses. But he also wanted to expand and bring a little bit of Mongolia to Singapore. So he worked with the Embassy of Mongolia, who donated this yurt. And so now there's this yurt which is part of this camp, and inside it's really pretty, it's very comfortable, there's even aircon, and you can choose to sleep in it during the camp if you want. So yeah, you can look up Beyond Expeditions, you can look up their website, or they are also listed on some other platforms like Seek Sophie, which have a whole list of experiences that you can book here.
Well, thank you so much to our adventurous colleague Clara Locke. Her survival camp experience is at straitstimes.com. There's a video as well. For more news, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below. I'm Olivia Quay. See you tomorrow on The Big Story.